Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now, here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. We are now beginning our fourth season, and we are very excited for the fourth year to continue to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, which we always begin our seasons with, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung, heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we interview experts for today's show, again, the first of our fourth season on climate change. We're going to look at what is climate change, how do we know it when we see it? Now, the effects of human-caused climate change are happening right now. There seems to be almost universal agreement among scientists that Earth will continue to warm and the effects will indeed be profound. Effects that scientists had long predicted would result in global climate change are now occurring almost each and every day. Things such as sea ice loss, accelerated sea level rise like in South Florida, and longer, more intense heat waves, floods, and other things. In fact, some changes, such as droughts, wildfires, and extreme rainfall, are even happening faster than scientists previously had assessed and estimated. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which is the United Nations body established to assess the science related to climate change, modern humans have never before seen the observed changes in our global climate, and some of these changes are irreversible over the next hundreds or thousands of years. The severity of effects caused by climate change will depend on the path of our future human activities. More greenhouse gas emissions will lead to more climate extremes and widespread damaging effects across the entire planet. But if we can reduce those emissions, we may avoid some of the worst effects. Now, while Earth's climate has changed throughout its history, the current warming is happening at a rate not seen even in the past 10,000 years. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, since systemic scientific assessments began in the 1970s, the influence of human activity on the warming of the climate system has evolved from theory to established fact. Climate change, together with other natural and human-made health stressors, influences human health and disease in numerous ways. Some existing health threats will intensify and are indeed intensifying now, and new health threats will emerge. And not everyone is equally at risk. Important considerations for risk are age, economic resources, and location, among others. Now, here are some important climate change facts. The world is now 1.2 degrees warmer than it was in the last century. And the amount of CO2, or carbon dioxide, in the atmosphere has risen by 50%. Earth stores 90% of that extra energy in the ocean. In 1896, a seminal paper by a Swedish scientist predicted that changes in the atmospheric carbon dioxide levels could substantially alter the surface temperature through the greenhouse gas effect. And of course, that's happening. The direct damage costs to health are estimated to be between $2 to $4 billion per year by 2030, which is only 8 years from now. Zero carbon solutions are indeed becoming competitive across economic sectors, and they represent about 25% of emissions. And by 2030, again, 8 years from now, zero carbon solutions could be competitive in sectors representing over 70% of our global emissions. And the area covered by sea ice in the Arctic at the end of summer has shrunk by about 40% since 1979. And I think we see those pictures on television with the polar bears and they have no ice to step on. So it's here and it's real. So if you care about your health, then you have to care about climate change, because that's the biggest reason, the urgent reason as to why we must care. Now, climate change is not always easy to wrap your head around. It can seem distant, far away, or less urgent than many of the other challenges that we all face day to day. Especially today, as we face global pandemic, it may not appear to be an immediate threat like COVID-19 or even monkeypox. However, the warming planet has impacts that are pervasive, they are immediate, and they indeed endanger our health and safety, and we cannot afford to wait any longer to act. Climate change can lead to adverse health outcomes in both direct and indirect ways. Severe storms and heat waves are sudden and they can be deadly, as we have seen. Longer-term impacts such as increased heart disease, respiratory complications from worsened air quality, increased incidence of vector-borne disease, and reduced access to clean water and healthy food are more difficult to understand and wrap our heads around. The true breadth of the impact of climate change on health cannot be reduced to one single number or one single factor. Now, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that is the CDC, list air pollution, allergens, disease carried by vectors, food and waterborne, diarrheal disease, food security, mental health, and stress-related disorders, floods, temperature extremes, and wildfires for climate-related effects on health. These are only the beginning. Climate change is already a health emergency and will expand in the years to come. Not only do weather events that result in flooding have immediate and devastating impacts on communities, but there are also concerning long-term health impacts, as we mentioned. For example, infrastructure damage during hurricanes and floods can become susceptible to water intrusion from sewer lines, which may lead to increased rates of asthma, other upper respiratory symptoms, and lower respiratory infections such as pneumonia. Higher global temperatures would lead to increased ozone concentrations at ground level and higher levels of harmful particulate matter in the air, which, according to the CDC, could lead to the premature deaths of estimated 1,000 to 4,500 Americans per year in the coming years. Now, even more fundamentally, incidents of water and food insecurity will continue to increase as our crops become increasingly diseased and water sources contaminated. For every 1 degree rise in global temperature, a 6% decline in global wheat yields and a 10% decline in rice yields is expected. In the United States, in the year 2018, just over 11% of households were already food insecure at some point during that year. And in the world, more than 820 million people already go hungry. The global community's inability to mobilize quickly to prevent the spread of COVID-19 also illustrates the hurdles that we will need to overcome when we're dealing with global emergencies of scale in the future, including those that are more difficult to perceive and evolve over longer time horizons. However, the coronavirus crisis has also illustrated that health is a motivating factor for action and that there are things we can do as a society to mitigate and adapt. In fact, if we are driven, we have an immense ability to change together as a community. And this is what's going to be needed now and in the near future for us to fight the climate change crisis that is indeed upon us. According to a survey about climate change that was conducted by the Kaiser Family Foundation and the Washington Post, they found that 7 in 10 U.S. adults are indeed worried that climate change will cause harm to the health of people living in the U.S., and a majority of these think that businesses, the government, energy companies, and state governments are not doing nearly enough. They think they're doing way too little. Now, this is a lot, but here today to help us unpack and understand some of this are two experts whom we hope will make us as smart as they are. Today we have with us Lauren Casey and Karin Kirk. Now, Lauren is a meteorologist for the Climate Matters program at Climate Central. Lauren specializes in communicating the connections between climate change and extreme weather. Prior to joining Climate Central, Lauren worked as a broadcast meteorologist for more than 15 years, and she earned an Emmy Award for her snowstorm coverage in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and she's a certified broadcast meteorologist by the American Meteorological Society. Welcome, Lauren. Did I get all of that right?
Yes, thank you very much. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Bernice.
Thank you. And our other guest is Karin Kirk. Karin is a geologist and a science journalist. Karin is a contributing writer for the Yale Climate Connections and a science writer for NASA's climate change website. And most importantly, Karin puts her messaging skills to a real-world test by regularly engaging policymakers, voters, and everyday people. And it's everyday people who our show is aimed at. And those varied perspectives that she has have helped her to develop reliable strategies to effectively communicate our climate science. Welcome, Karin. Did I get all of that right?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm definitely looking forward to this discussion.
And thank you all for being with us. We're going to go to break, and right after the break, we'll come back and really dig into this kind of heavy subject matter with Karin and Lauren. Thank you. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Market, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. Our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. And our other sponsor is the Weston A. Price Foundation. Based on the research of nutrition pioneer Dr. Weston Price, whose studies establish the parameters of human health and determine the optimum characteristics of human diets. The Weston A. Price Foundation is a member-supported organization dedicated to restoring nutrient-dense foods to the modern diet, especially animal fats, through education, scientific research, and activism. It connects local farms with health-conscious consumers. Their annual conference for 2022 is called Wise Traditions, and it's where nearly 1,100 attendees gather for learning, demonstration exhibits, impressive speakers, and delicious, nutritious meals that embody the principles of the Weston A. Price Foundation. It's coming up in Knoxville, Tennessee on October 21st through 23rd. For more information, visit wisetraditions.org. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on climate change. What is climate change? How do we know it when we see it? And we are back with our guest, Karin Kirk, with Yale Climate Connections and NASA's climate change website, and Lauren Casey with Climate Central. Again, thank you, ladies, for joining us today. I want to start with Lauren. If you can tell us, Lauren, is there an official definition of climate change? And often it seems as though the terms global warming and climate change are used interchangeably. So talk to us about the difference, the contrast in this two. Should they be used interchangeably? It's confusing at best for people to understand this. As we talked about in the intro, it's a lot to wrap your head around. So talk to us about those terms before we go dig further into this.
I think it's fair to use them interchangeably, but the more accurate term would be climate change. So when we talk about global warming, we're talking about the warming of the global mean temperature. So it's more of the cause, and then climate change is the effects, both regionally and locally, of that warming of our atmosphere. So I think the more proper term would be climate change, because that encompasses the myriad impacts that we see from a warming atmosphere, such as sea level rise, increased heavy precipitation events, more intense hurricanes. So I think the proper term would be climate change.
Okay, because it's the cause, and you're saying that the effect that most of us see and certainly that we experience is the global warming, but there's probably a lot of other things that it's doing also other than warming the globe.
Correct, yes. I think if you use the term global warming, you're kind of missing out on a lot of components of the changes that we are seeing all around us and to our ecosystems.
Okay. And so how is climate change measured, though, and why is it measured in that way? Lauren?
So when you're talking about global warming, again, you're taking temperature readings all across the globe from various temperature sources, from weather stations all around the planet, and coming out with an average temperature, which we know is increasing after the Industrial Revolution. So that's one way we kind of measure global warming. As far as measuring climate change, I mean, there's a multitude of factors, multitude of effects. We're talking about sea level rise, so there's measurements for that. We're talking about, heavy precipitation, flooding events, so an increase in that. So I guess there can be many, many measurements on the many effects that the global warming is having to our climate and climate system.
I'm sure this, like many other things, a measurement of climate change or global warming has evolved over time. Do you recall how they initially measured it? For example, are there certain fixed points where these fixed points, they are measured at the same time or a certain time every year, and then they take those and they average them?
Right. So they're taking an average of all of those different temperatures, and then we're comparing them yearly. So we know that we've warmed 1.2 degrees Fahrenheit since pre-industrial times. So yes, they are taking an average of all of those average temperatures across the planet. Also, we take a look at how much carbon is in the atmosphere by parts per million. So we know that there's a significant increase in that as well. So those are kind of two parameters that give us measurements to the changes in the climate system.
Indeed. Thank you. And Karin, how do we know climate change when we see it? And then what's the science?
I might start with the second question, with the science, because it's really easy, as you've mentioned, to get confused about this. And, you hear all these different things and, what to believe. I'm a big fan of making the science quite simple. Maybe that's because I'm a geologist and we have this very, very long-term perspective, but it is pretty simple. I mean, we can measure directly the greenhouse gases that are accumulating in the atmosphere. We can measure that all around the world, today, yesterday, every day in the past, going back to the 50s.
How do you measure that?
Farther back, just by taking an air sample.
Okay.
So you need somewhere with relatively clean air. So one of the best records is actually in Hawaii, on top of Mauna Loa volcano, where it's not influenced by people driving their cars and things like that. That's the longest direct measurement. But then we can go back in time using things like ice cores, which actually have little bubbles in them, which is an amazing little capture of old atmosphere from way back. And so those go hundreds of thousands, almost a million years back. So we can just look at the contents of the atmosphere and see how much it's changed. We have a really great record of that. And so the more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the more it insulates. It's just like putting on a puffy coat. Warmer, warmer, warmer. It sounds great in February. Who doesn't love a puffy coat? Do you want a puffy coat in July and August? Mm-hmm. Not so much. How about 2 puffy coats? That's what we've done. So that's the science. We've increased the greenhouse gases. We can measure it lots of ways, lots of places, and that makes the climate system warmer. And we feel that in lots of ways. So that helps with the science?
It does, but I want to take a moment here to dig into something that we do every year when we talk about climate change. Because, again, there's so many terms being thrown about, and you've got people on one side who are denying it or saying they don't believe it, and you have others, researchers and scientists, trying to show us the science. And everybody's kind of using different terms. I wonder sometimes if that's not intentional to cause confusion. So I want to dig into, again, explaining to people what greenhouse gases are, how they cause climate change and global warming. Karin, can you?
Yeah, and your intuition is exactly right. It is intentional. Because if you want to confuse people, then you just take things that are confusing and you make them even more confusing. So yes, that's intentional. And that's our job, people like Lauren and I as communicators, to bring this out to people, as often as we can and in really relatable terms. So greenhouse gases are fundamentally important parts of our atmosphere. Without any greenhouse gases, the Earth would be a frozen ball. Not so much fun. So what they do is they trap outgoing heat. So heat comes in from the sun, bounces off the planet, goes back out. It keeps some of it in there, just like you wearing a jacket. And so carbon dioxide is one of the more changeable and important greenhouse gases. Water vapor is also a greenhouse gas, but that kind of just follows behind the temperature. So that in and of itself doesn't dictate the Earth's temperature. And so basically, if we add more carbon dioxide, methane is another one, and there's several others, but those are the two really important ones right now. The more of them we add, the more outgoing heat they block. So literally, it's like just adding layers of clothing. That there's heat radiating off of your body, there's heat radiating off of the planet, and we're keeping it in the system rather than venting it off.
Okay, it's like two examples come to my mind to make sure that we're understanding it correctly. They call them greenhouse gases, and if people think about greenhouses and what greenhouses do, greenhouses are these big plastic structures that are surrounding plants that are translucent, where the sun can come in. And so it's kind of like also your car in the sun, in the Texas heat, when the windows are rolled up, the sun's coming in. And it's pretty miserable in there if you don't have the air on or you don't let the windows down. Similarly, with the greenhouse, the sun is trapped in to make the plants grow and to have moisture and everything. And they're trapping everything that's within that greenhouse inside. And in that similar way, those gases and emissions and all the gook and the soot from fires and the smoke and the nasty stuff from cars is being trapped down in the environment with us. You look as the greenhouse is what's above us, so it traps all that heat here with us. And that's causing the global warming and the climate change, i.e. greenhouse gases.
Right.
Okay.
And I'll note, I have a greenhouse. I'm a big gardener. I have a greenhouse. And when the sun is shining just the littlest bit, greenhouse gets outrageously hot, right? It amplifies.
Like your car when you get into when your car's parked outside and you go to get in it after you've been out on a hot day. It's got plenty of heat. The first thing you do is roll your windows down and then turn your air on. So that is to establish for our listeners how heat gets trapped in the atmosphere and how intense that heat is. And if you think about that intense heat in your car, then that's like the intense heat on the trees and the planet and everything else that's on Earth, and all that air is being trapped with them. And I didn't want to belabor that, but I think it's important that people understand. We throw around the term greenhouse gases all the time, and they don't necessarily think about or know what that means. But I think once they do, they can clearly see the impact of global warming and the impact of climate change. You think about the impact on yourself when you sit in that hot car. It's not fun.
Right. And you're also seeing a slight change in the science community of, in addition to the word greenhouse gases, is just straight up heat trapping gases.
And I think that's a more, and I like that term, that's a more intuitive term, heat trapping. Everybody can understand heat trapping. Greenhouse is easy to bring about confusion if one wants to. And a lot of people just may not know what that means. But heat trapping, got it. Thank you all. We're going to go to break. We have been with Karin Kirk and with Lauren Casey. And we're going to go to break. And after that, we will continue this interesting conversation. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. To today's show on climate change. I like to call it our climate change primer. What is climate change and how do we know it when we see it? And we are back with Lauren Casey, a meteorologist with Climate Central, and with Karin, Kirk, a geologist who writes for Yale Climate Connections and for NASA's climate change website. Again, thank you, ladies, for being with us today. Now, I want to go back to Karin. We were unpacking the meaning of greenhouse gases that we are now, henceforth, I hope, going to remember to call heat-trapping gases. Karin, what's the difference in natural and human-caused climate change?
So glad you asked that, because that's an important distinction, and I think that is an area of confusion. And it's also an area that's exploited by people who are trying to confuse you. And when I tell people I work in climate change, it's a question I always get. Yes, the climate has changed before. Of course it has. The Earth has a long and dynamic history, thank goodness. And so, yes, but the fact that it has changed before is sometimes misconstrued to mean that we can't possibly change it. And so let me just give you a great analogy there. So you wake up in the morning, your lawn is wet. How did that happen? Well, it rains naturally. So does that mean that it's not possible that your sprinklers ran overnight? Like, of course it's not. Does that mean that maybe the wind blew your neighbor's sprinkler? Or does it, there's all these reasons it could be. Just the fact that it does rain does not always explain why your lawn is wet, right? And you could apply that to lots of natural phenomena that also have human causes. So let's eliminate the idea that just because the climate can change on its own means it's somehow impossible for us to change it, because humans are agents of the scale of a geologic force. We've changed the composition of the atmosphere, and we've done so really quickly, much more so than what happens in natural cycles during the ice ages. And we've loaded the atmosphere with these heat-trapping gases by a lot and very quickly, and nature works much more slowly with stuff like that. And so the difference between us and nature is that, first of all, it is us. We're taking carbon that was stored in Earth's crust and we're burning it, pumping it up in the atmosphere. So that's directly our actions. We're doing it much faster. So now we're seeing the Earth's climate system responding to this sort of injection of 50% more heat-trapping gases.
And what are some of the ways that humans cause climate change?
Yeah, most of it's related to burning fossil fuels. And so if you think of how, that carbon has been stored underground for hundreds of millions of years, and that is part of how the Earth has balanced the climate system, or how the climate system has been balanced over time.
Just to be sure,
carbon,
how do we use fossil fuels?
We burn them for heat, for transportation, and to make electricity. And those are important things. Like we have a very nice, comfortable life, and we've built a lot of prosperity and infrastructure and modern living.
So it's like driving our cars, barbecuing, producing electricity from coal-fired industrial plants that are making many of the products that we use every day. Whenever you see a smokestack, you are seeing gas going up that has the potential to be trapped in our environment.
You got it.
And those are just the big things. There are many small day-to-day things all of us do as well to contribute to that.
Right.
Now, Lauren, as a meteorologist, many of us perceive that you have a special knowledge relationship with climate change because you deal with the climate. However, I know a lot of weather issues and events have cycles. And how does this affect what we know about climate change and our ability to measure and assess it? These weather cycles and things.
Sure. Yeah. When you're talking about weather, you're talking about the weather that happens outside your house every day. It rains, it's sunny. Now, when you talk about climate, you're taking what typically occurs in your area over a long period of time. That would be your climate. So adding up all those weather days and what you would call, quote unquote, normal for that area. So when we're talking about climate change, we're changing these normals. We're changing what is common for a particular area weather-wise. And we see that every day, or not necessarily every day, but we see that with our everyday weather because of these changes in climate. So climate is the long term of all your weather days, and weather happens sensibly each day.
Let's talk about seasons, because I think people might understand that when you put that into seasons. There's summer. And so we look at a summer, how hot it is, and that's over the months of summer, whatever they are for your area. The same thing with winter. And so what are we seeing, though, in terms of that? It seems to me we're just coming off the summer, we think and we hope, here in North Texas. And I imagine other people, somewhere they're coming off their winter somewhere in the world, and, the seasons are different. What are we seeing in terms of that's letting us know that climate change really is here and persistent and we're in trouble?
Sure. We're warming all of our seasons. So spring, fall, summer, winter. And it's particularly concerning when we're warming the summertime months. As Karin was saying, you don't want a puffy coat or two puffy coats in July and August because we already have hot days at summertime, right? But then we're exacerbating that heat. We're tacking on more degrees and we're tacking on more moisture, which we're adding humidity to the air, which affects the heat index. So that feels like temperature that your body is taking in and responding to. So we're dealing with these bouts of extreme heat, days that are hotter, increased days of over 90 degrees, increased days with heat index values over 100 degrees. And that is very compromising to human health in many, many ways.
What about the length or the typical or historic terms or lengths of our seasons, spring, winter, fall, and summer? Are we seeing a demonstrable or immeasurable change in that?
Sure. We're seeing kind of summer now leading into fall. And where we're seeing a lot of warming in particular is in overnight lows, and especially in the wintertime and the fall. The warming of the overnight lows is something that is consistent and a climate change signal. And that can have big implications for summer as well, because you're hot during the day and then you're atypically warm overnight and your body doesn't get a chance to cool off during that time frame. And as we're extending the length of heat waves, it can be very taxing on your body. And particularly for underserved communities where people don't have access to air conditioning, cooling centers, green spaces, they don't really have the ability to help cool themselves. So the warming in the seasons, and particularly the warming in the summertime, is a great concern.
You just mentioned something that I want to talk about a little bit more, and that was the high overnight temperatures. And it strikes me because I know this past summer, which was particularly hot for us here in North Texas, the weatherman was saying almost every day about how high the overnight temperatures were. He did not say, and I wish that he would, say that what you just said, that is, I think you said that's an indication of climate change?
Correct. Yeah, it's a signal of climate change. Yep.
Okay. What about the opposite side of that coin in terms of the cold weather? Because here in my area, and I don't know, I rather assume it's similar for other areas, while our winters are not getting longer, they are getting more severe and unpredictable.
Right. And that's a direct correlation with climate change. More variability in our weather, more extreme weather. Now, we're seeing less frequent cold and less frequent cold records. We're seeing many, many, many more hot records. But you can see still extreme cold. And in one way, climate change is contributing to that, because as we're lessening the temperature difference between the Arctic and where we live in the mid-latitudes, that allows, when we have a big temperature difference, the jet stream is strong and it kind of stays to the north and it's less bendy and wavy. So it kind of keeps that cold air locked up to our north. However, when we lessen that temperature difference between these two areas of the globe, the jet stream relaxes a little bit and it's allowed to be more wavy. So when you get a big dip in the jet stream, that allows all that cold Arctic air to spill down into parts of our country which don't really see that kind of extreme cold. So the implications of a warming atmosphere and the kind of slowing and more bendy nature to the jet stream that can happen can contribute to those cold Arctic outbreaks in places where you typically wouldn't assume that they would happen.
I guess the same is true for the severity and the variability as well. Sure. We had some extreme events in North Texas last year, and because it was much colder than usual for longer than usual. Not over the long term, but just we had like 2 or 3 or 4 days when it was like really below freezing, and it created havoc.
Yeah, it puts a lot of pressure on the grid.
Yeah, the grid as well as a lot of pipes that for which we were not prepared. Thank you for telling us that. We're going to go to break now, and then we're going to come back and talk to Karin a little bit more about, I guess, what I want to call public perception and public sentiment about climate change. We'll be right back on the other side with Lauren Casey with Climate Central and Karin Kirk, a geologist who writes for Yale Climate Connections as well as NASA's climate change website. Thank you. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Market, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. Our other sponsor is Lund Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. And our other sponsor is the Weston A. Price Foundation. Based on the research of nutrition pioneer Dr. Weston Price, whose studies establish the parameters of human health and determine the optimum characteristics of human diets. The Weston A. Price Foundation is a member-supported organization dedicated to restoring nutrient-dense foods to the modern diet, especially animal fats, through education, scientific research, and activism. It connects local farms with health-conscious consumers. Their annual conference for 2022, called Wise Traditions, is coming up. It is where nearly 1,100 attendees gather for learning, demonstrations, exhibits, impressive speakers, and delicious, nutritious meals that embody the principles of the Weston A. Price Foundation. It's coming up in Knoxville, Tennessee on October 21 through 23. For more information and for registration, visit wisetraditions.org. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on climate change. What is climate change? How do we know it when we see it? And again, we're back with Karin Kirk and Lauren Casey. And I want to go to Karin. You know, for a long time, Karin, climate deniers were kind of sucking out all the oxygen. And I want to talk about where are we now in terms of public perception and sentiment about the reality and the impact of climate change.
So that's a great question, and I have excellent news, which is that the fraction of the American public that we call the dismissive group, as in they dismiss everything to do with climate science, is quite small. In your mind, if you think, oh, I'm going to talk to someone about climate change, and you probably imagine it's some double digits of percent, but it's not. It's 9%. It's very small. It might be loud, and it might be something we worry about because no one likes conflict and no one likes to be yelled at or whatever. And that speaks more to the tactics of that group than the size of that group. On the other side of the spectrum, the majority of Americans are concerned or even alarmed about climate change. Nearing 60% of Americans actually are like, uh-oh, this is a thing, and it's actionable, and it worries me. So it's changed. The people are really understanding it. They're feeling it. They're hearing about it, thanks to folks like Lauren, broadcasting. And so, yeah, public perception has really changed, and people are getting it and feeling it. There's no replacing your personal lived experience for having an impact.
Indeed. Thank you. I'm going to go back to Lauren now. Lauren, how does geography affect climate change in specific areas and worldwide? Talk to us about how different parts of the world may be experiencing different manifestations of climate change.
Sure. Sure, geography plays a big role in the type of impacts that you're going to see from climate change. So we talk about coastal communities and sea level rise. They're going to be the most vulnerable. So they're depleting their wetlands too. So as we continue to build and urbanize and take away our wetlands, we're taking away the ability to kind of buffer when storms come in. So we have talking about Hurricane Ian, of course, everyone is very closely watching along the Florida coastline. So we have the sea level rise impacting coastal communities. We have the depletion of wetlands, and both of these things can increase and magnify the impacts of a tropical system. So everything kind of works together too. And you're talking about we're warming the oceans. So that is more fuel for Hurricane Ian. So it can cause rapid intensification. We're seeing increase in the number of hurricanes, tropical systems that undergo rapid intensification. That's just 30 seconds worth of threats that can be faced by the Gulf Coast, the East Coast. Of course, if you're talking about places across the globe, we just saw Pakistan, all of the unbelievable catastrophic flooding with a third of the country underwater. So they're dealing with, they had a bout of extreme heat, and then that was followed by a lot of rain, atypical monsoon rains. Also, that extreme heat caused glacial melt in the Himalayas, which was then transferred down through the Indus River system. So they dealt all with rain flooding, freshwater flooding, and then river flooding on top of that, contributing to these catastrophic floods. So it's, in these different geographies, it's just not just one climate change effect. They kind of build on top of each other to cause this kind of climate chaos that impacts so many people's lives and livelihoods.
Indeed, and I'm glad you mentioned that, and especially within the framework of our conversation today, which really is a lot about climate change communications. And the reason is we just experienced almost the exact same thing here in North Texas, where we had many, many, many days of weather in excess of 100 degrees, and our grounds got very dry and hard, and then we had flooding, we had rainfall more than we normally get, and we had, I can't say catastrophic, but it was just short of catastrophic flooding. We had some flood deaths here. But unfortunately, when I go back to climate change communications, it was not communicated as climate change as it was in Pakistan. That's the good news, that it was clearly communicated that this catastrophe in climate change in Pakistan was attributable to climate change. And I remember hearing over and over and over again that they were suffering the burden, and yet they had very minuscule causation. So that communication was loud and clear. But again, the very same thing happened here in North Texas. But it was, I don't know if I ever heard the term climate change being used in any of the conversations or descriptions of that. And so we still have a long way to go in terms of communication, because that communication, I think, is going to be one of the big factors in causing individuals to make those lifestyle changes that need to be made, and in causing individuals to begin to walk the talk. Those, what did you say, those 90% that believe that it's real, but now they have to begin to walk that talk and those thoughts. So it makes a difference. Going back to Karin, where is it and how do you think most ordinary people are affected by climate change in their everyday lives, whether or not that they perceive it as being climate change?
Right. That gets back to what Lauren was saying about every geography is a little bit different. So I live in the northern Rocky Mountains in Montana, and the thing that's very noticeable here is fire season, which has gotten worse and way longer. There used to be some sort of expectation that maybe around Labor Day you'd expect some smoky skies. Last year it started in June, and it went through all the way through September, and then we even had a horrible fire in December that burned down the majority of a rural town, or not the majority, but it burned several structures in a town in December. And then Boulder, Colorado had a very similar event a week later. So fires are one of these viscerally like it matches like in your cognition that's related to climate change. It's hot, it's burning, but now the fire season has gotten longer and longer. And like literally you wake up in the morning and you can smell it and you can see it. It's very visceral, but it depends where you are. So every geography is going to be different.
In your area, since you were talking about fire season, do the residents perceive or communicate that it is due to climate change?
Mostly, yes.
Okay.
Like you keep saying, it comes down to messaging. So that's something that people studying climate here in Montana are trying very hard to put out. But sometimes these messages are seen as political, and so it a little bit depends on that type of climate in your state as well, the political climate. But yes, the fact that the fire season has just gotten so long is really visual. So in the West, it's more than a month longer now on average. So it's not subtle.
Do we perceive that fire season or wildfires are going to go to other areas too? And we just have about 3 minutes to go to the end of the show, because I know we had them here in Texas, and that's not something we're particularly accustomed to. I also remember in our very first season, we had the opportunity to interview folks from Queensland, Australia. And that was almost 2 years ago when they were having their wildfire. And they told me then, it's coming for you all.
Right. And I think a tidy summary is that the weather that you used to think only other people have, get ready, because you may have it. You may have fires, floods. You might have never had one thing, and now you have it. And so a little bit what Lauren was saying, the sort of chaotic nature of unexpected, exacerbated highs and lows and swings in our lived experience of weather is absolutely consistent with what's going on in the science of climate change.
Just have a couple of minutes to go. I want to go back to Lauren now. Lauren, are there any promising scientific interventions out there that may be able to hold back some of the ravages of this forward march of climate change?
Yeah, there's a whole host of new technologies coming out for mitigation and adaptation, which is really encouraging. And just a shift, like Karin was saying, in public perception is a huge help in putting investments into these and support into some of these technologies. But I think the main thing that we need to concentrate on is reducing our emissions and switching over to renewable energies. So about 20% of our electricity that is generated in the United States right now is provided by renewables, things like solar, hydropower, wind power. We need to increase that number so we can reduce the carbon dioxide that we are putting into the atmosphere and the greenhouse gases. I think would be the main thing we need to focus on.
Indeed. Thank you. And thank you for being with us. And we just have 1 minute to go. And I want to ask Karin a quick question, and that is there an intersection between climate change and some of the things we're seeing in our lives today, like inflation and high housing prices?
Only a minute?
Only a minute.
Yeah, because the climate and the Earth, even on large, is relevant to everything. All of our resources, all of our water. You cannot have an economy without a planet. So, the quick and easy answer is absolutely, and especially energy being a natural resource. And right behind that is water and food. So all those things, direct connections to the planet. And you mess with the planet, you can expect trouble throughout the economy. But as Lauren was said, there's a lot of silver linings and a lot of possibilities to improve and clean up our act.
Indeed. And thank you all so much for your taking time to have this conversation with us today. And it leaves me, and I'm sure you all, with even more of a knowledge that climate change communications is a very important area that needs to grow and expand. And so we're hoping to continue to do our part here at Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. And you ladies do a good job, too. So thank you very much. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your homes, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is the result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day, like yourselves. And each of those tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up, one way or the other, to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you for listening in today, and join us again next week for more on our October series on climate change. Thank you.